It's Florida week. Time to get out of the malaise of the non-conference showdown with an in-state Conference USA team, move into Southeastern Conference action as LSU and Florida will play Saturday night in Death Valley. I just wanted to take some time at the beginning of the week to discuss the LSU and Florida rivalry. It's a very, very interesting rivalry based on a number of different factors. When you think about rivalries in collegiate athletics, so many of them are born out of geography, right? Like, it's just very natural that A&M and Texas are huge rivals, that Ole Miss and Mississippi State are rivals, that Louisville and Kentucky are rivals. Even the geographical impact of Michigan and Ohio State, which border each other, like, that's what most rivalries are born from. And LSU and Florida, although, you know, the Florida parishes of Louisiana and the Panhandle of Florida aren't too far away from each other, it's not a natural geographical rivalry. But the two schools were founding members of the SEC, and they've played every year since 1971. So there's a lot of history, and we all know that in 1992, when the SEC expanded to 12 teams and brought in Arkansas and South Carolina, and then they went to the permanent opponent model, why LSU and Florida were paired together. Because Auburn and Georgia stood up at the table and said, well, we're going to play every year, and we're not in the same division, so figure that out. And Alabama and Tennessee said, yeah, us too, we're going to play every year, and we're not in the same division, so figure it out. And the answer was, well, we'll have to go ahead and make everyone play one team from the other side every year. In fact, it was two. And so they weren't going to pair Florida, which was at, new levels under Steve Spurrier, with Ole Miss, who hadn't been any good in decades. They weren't going to pair him with Mississippi State, who had never been good. They weren't going to pair Arkansas and Florida. LSU wasn't going to get to play Vanderbilt every year. So it was naturally like, okay, LSU and Florida, like, y'all are playing each other. And at that point, LSU was primed to enter just a disastrous period of its football history in the mid-90s, early 90s, I should say. And Florida reached heights it had never reached before. And essentially, when LSU signed up for that in 1992, it was the worst time you could have signed up for that in either of those two programs' histories. And basically, Florida made you pay for it. From 1988 through 2001, LSU won one time. That's essentially from my birthday to 7th grade. LSU won once. The average score of those Florida wins was 35-10. There was a 58-3 in 93. There was a 56-13 in 96. I mean, it was just an absolute demolition annually by this program that LSU had been assigned to, because Tennessee and Alabama wanted to play, and Georgia and Auburn wanted to play. LSU got outscored in those 9 losses in the 90s, 315-93. But then something happened in 2001. Steve Spurrier left, and Nick Saban had been in Baton Rouge for a year, and the tide started to turn in this rivalry. Saban took his team to Gainesville and just annihilated Ron Zook's first Florida team 36-7 in Gainesville. They paid for it with Matt Mock's broken foot, but they went there and just crushed them. And that started a stretch of 3 wins in 4 years for LSU. The actually one loss was in Tiger Stadium the year LSU won the national championship in 2003. But LSU would also win 4 out of 6 years, right there in Saban's era, right into the beginning of Les Miles. Post Steve Spurrier, this game has been played 23 times, and LSU has won 15 of the 23. It's 15-8. And of late, LSU has owned this rivalry. Before last year, when LSU went to the Swamp and got beat by Florida, LSU had won 5 in a row. Currently, LSU has won 9 of the last 13. And that stretch of dominance by LSU against Florida has quite literally evened this rivalry up. Would you believe that these two teams in their history have played 71 times? LSU has won 34. Florida has won 34. There have been 3 ties. It is dead solid even in 71 matchups between these two schools. I didn't know that until I looked it up today. Now, I realized that Florida had a pretty spotty history pre-Spurrier, and we realized I did know that LSU had dominated of late. But you consider these two programs since 1992 when they were forced to play each other annually. They have accounted for 12 SEC championships, more than 1 out of 3, 12 out of 33. 12 SEC titles, 6 national titles, and 3 Heisman trophies. It is a rivalry, to bring this full circle, that has been born out of greatness as opposed to geography. And that's really cool. Now, look, y'all know me. I'm not going to try to pretend something that I'm not. If you told me that you get to pick a permanent opponent for LSU, I'm going to pick Vanderbilt. My second choice is going to be Kentucky. My third choice is going to be Mississippi State. Okay? That's who I would choose to play because I'm interested in winning. And that gives me the best chance to win. But I'm also not going to sit here and suggest that the history that LSU and Florida share is not pretty special since that fateful day when they were paired together in 1992. It has been. It has produced some crazy stuff. Y'all know it all. Hurricane Matthew, where the game was supposed to be in Gainesville, and they decided not to play it in Gainesville, and LSU tried, and then they moved it to Baton Rouge, and then Ogeron was trying to sew up the job, and LSU tried to pitch it to Darius Geis, and he got stopped at the 1-yard line. You know about that. The crazy, wild shoe game that nobody will ever forget in the fog in a COVID-empty Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. Jacob Hester with the 4th downs. The fake field goal in the swamp with Urban Meyer pointing the other way. LSU and Florida in 1997. Who could forget that? There have been just crazy, crazy instances in this game, and the levels that these programs have reached are amazing. And so it is a special thing, and we don't know if this is going to be an annual thing moving forward. They've moved to 16 teams. They're moving to 9 conference games next year. Everybody's going to get 3 permanent opponents. LSU and Florida might be. But if LSU and Florida are paired together, then Florida is going to have to drop one of its traditional rivalries. They'll have to drop either Tennessee or Georgia or one of the ones out east that they've played forever and ever, like South Carolina. We'll see. I just don't think that they're going to put Florida with Tennessee, Georgia, and LSU. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Certainly LSU and Florida have more history than those other teams, but you're not going to pair Florida with 3 of the Blue Bloods. It's just not going to happen. So if you don't get paired with them, quote unquote, permanently, and we know that it's not actually permanent, they're just going to reevaluate every 6, 7, 8 years, you may have a couple years where LSU and Florida don't play each other. And it'll be like LSU and Auburn these last 2 years and LSU and Mississippi State these last 2 years. And y'all know how I feel about that as well. I can get just as fired up for Texas coming in here as I can for Florida coming in here. I have more history with Florida, but it's a blue blood program. It's an iconic brand and uniform, and it'll be a budding rivalry if it's Texas or if it's Oklahoma or if Tennessee comes in here with one of their really good teams. If Georgia comes in here. I'm not as invested individually with the programs because the names and faces change so often. I think everyone in here would suggest they feel a little bit differently about Kalen DeBoer's Alabama than they did Nick Saban's Alabama. I think everyone would suggest you were just as excited when LSU beat Clemson this year and you realize that Auburn wasn't on the schedule. That, to me, is not a big deal. But I get why former players like Matt Flynn and Jacob Hester, who are on our morning show, who have such a tight bond with this rivalry. I understand that. And they'll play on Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. And the winner of that game will have an edge in the series, which is kind of cool. So this is not about whether or not LSU and Florida have to play moving forward. It's not about who's going to be the permanent opponent. Maybe it will be. But it is to me kind of a celebration of, wow, what an amazing run this has been. It got off to a terrible start in the 90s for LSU, and you thought, how are we ever going to beat these guys? But until last year, there was a sense in games like, when are we ever going to beat these guys? And the programs are just iconic. The last time these two teams played in Tiger Stadium was one of the greatest performances any of us have ever seen. It was one of the greatest performances in the history of the Southeastern Conference. It was Jaden Daniels running for 234 yards, passing for 372 yards, accounting for 5 touchdowns. First player in FBS history to run for 200 and throw for 350 in a game, and the 606 yards he accounted for were an SEC record. That night, he essentially etched his name on the Heisman Trophy. And now we'll see what the encore is for this LSU team that's looking to avenge a nasty loss in Gainesville. And oh, by the way, Billy Napier is like trying to save his job. So a lot of storylines in this matchup. The point of this segment was not to get into the X's and O's of this weekend. We got 3 days to get into that, and we certainly will. But it's been a very, very cool rivalry. One that may continue next year, may not. But that doesn't erase the 32 years that we've watched these two programs in the midst of some of the greatest runs they've ever had. I would argue the greatest runs they've ever had. And they've done it right across the field from each other. Been very, very cool. So LSU and Florida, Saturday night in Death Valley. Hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.